Hey, Cities Church, Kenny Ortiz here. Happy Memorial Day. Hope you're having a great Memorial Day weekend. In this video, we're going to launch into our next video devotional series. This one will be on 1 Corinthians, or what we would call the Apostle Paul's letter to the church in Corinth. In the early chapters of the letter, he is talking about various divisions and quarreling. And in chapter 1, he hones in on one specific source of divisions and quarreling within the church. He says that there's been a report of quarreling amongst them. And then in verse 12, he begins to explain the apparent source of this quarreling. He says that some of them are claiming that they follow Paul. Others say, I follow Apollos. Some say, I follow Cephas. And others say, I follow Christ. He basically is alluding to the fact that there are people in the Corinthian church that seem overly loyal to preachers more than Jesus. And it's interesting to me because the Corinthian church is certainly not unique in this regard. The church in the first century is seemingly similar to the church today. We do this all the time. We allow quarreling and divisions and fractures of relationships to come about in the body of Christ because of because we're overly loyal to certain preachers or certain denominations or certain theological tribes, right? And this becomes a division within the body of Christ. He says in verse 13, he says, was Paul crucified for you? Like, why are you boasting about your loyalty for this preacher? Why are you talking about how much you love Paul? Dude, Paul didn't die for you. If you're going to boast about anyone, boast about Christ, because he's the one that died for you. Now, I want to make it clear, I have no problem appreciating and loving preachers. Right? Look at over my right shoulder, you see Mr. Charles Spurgeon and Mr. Martin Luther, two preachers from church history that I'm a big fan of. I'm so thankful for their preaching and writing and the impact they've had on my life, even though we live centuries apart. But I got to be really, really careful that I don't allow my loyalty to these guys to begin to supersede my loyalty to Jesus, right? My loyalty to Jesus should be supreme. My loyalty to these guys should pale in comparison to my loyalty to Jesus, right? I got to be extremely cautious that I don't allow my love for these guys to begin to rival my love for Jesus. Now, of course we know this, right? Of course, you're probably watching this going, of course we know this, Kenny. Although we know it, I still think many of us are guilty of this sometimes. And so I'd encourage you to do the same. I'd encourage you to prayerfully take inventory and to be extremely careful of whatever propensities you might have to be overly loyal to a preacher or to a system of doctrines or a denomination. Or maybe for you, it's not a preacher. Maybe for you, it's a politician, right? Maybe for you, it's some other personality. In the letter, a few verses before this, the Apostle Paul reminds the Corinthians in verse 8 that it is Christ who will sustain them, right? Apollos is not going to sustain you. Paul is not going to sustain you. Cephas is not going to sustain you. It is only Christ that will sustain you. And the same is true for us. It's important to remember, John Piper will not sustain you. Charles Spurgeon, Martin Luther, John Calvin, they will not sustain you, right? Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama or LeBron James or Michael Jordan, no personality will sustain you. So don't put a bunch of energy boasting about them. Boast about Jesus. So rather than spending a bunch of energy boasting about things that are not worthy of it, spend all your energy boasting about Jesus. Why? Because he's the one that will sustain you. Because he's the one that was crucified for you. Because he is your wisdom and your redemption and your righteousness and your sanctification. He is the one that reigns supreme. He is the one that is worthy of our boasting. Christians, may we boast in Christ and Christ alone.